everyone, to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. This week, we're going to return to our series on the unseen world and go into a bit more depth on the topic of dreams. I've touched on dreams before, but I think this is a subject that really needs its own show. Possibly more than one, but we'll start with one. Okay, first off, the one universal thing about dreams is that science has shown us that everyone sleeps and everyone dreams, even if you don't remember them. Researchers have woken people up in certain stages of sleep and discovering that most but not all dreams tend to occur in certain stages. And again, most people report something even if they don't remember it when they wake up in the morning. I'm not going to try to go into dreams on a scientific level, but if you're interested, a good Google search will get you tons of information on the topic. But I think since the earliest prehistoric times, people have been fascinated with dreams, because most people do remember at least bits and pieces of them, and it gives people sort of a fantastic window into another world at night. One where they might find themselves seeming to be able to breathe underwater, fly through the air, or even talk to a departed loved one, just like they were still alive and standing in a room with them. My major professor at university, one of the great old men of anthropology in his day, Dr. Sean Wynn, used to talk about how he believed that there might be a connection between early man and making a connection actually between sleeping and death. Because in many ways, sleeping people seem in a way like they're dead, except that sleeping people wake up and dead people don't. Hence, he thought it likely that from the very earliest times, people made these connections between sleep and death, so it wasn't any surprise that they saw dreams that people experienced at night as a possible door to that other world where maybe people go when they died, in other words, the realm of the ancestors. And if they were over there, then it makes sense that you could contact them when you were in the dream state. He also noticed how closely many early cave paintings seem to reflect images that might have been seen in dreams or in visionary states, especially the kind of images induced by taking various hallucinogenic substances. Now, we're not going to get into the topic tonight of visionary trips on this show, especially not ones induced with hallucinogenic substances. But when you're dealing with the fascinating workings of the human mind, especially in regards to the unseen world, there can be a lot of crossover between dreams, daydreams, waking visions, and even induced vision, or dream. And I'm sure our ancestors observed the same sort of crossover. But then, as I've talked about in previous unseen shows, many traditional people do not make the kind of sharp lines between the world of the seen and the world of the unseen as most modern Western folks do. Often, they also don't make such a sharp line between the world of being awake and the world of being asleep. In some cultures, it's even called the dream time. And, we make a much bigger, we very much define I am awake or I am asleep. Not everybody does that in quite the same way. That said, most of us listening to the show live in modern Western worlds. And even if we perhaps come from a more traditional background, like maybe a Native American family that lives a more traditional lifestyle, or a worldview from a more traditional culture, First Nations or traditional culture, we still live surrounded by a modern culture that tends to blow dreams off either as a total fantasy or as the strange wonders of the unconscious mind that professional psychologists and psychiatrists may be able to understand, but the average person probably doesn't. In fact, they probably think it is somewhat of a joke a lot of the time. But the bottom line here is that most people, because they do dream, most people remember at least the occasional dream. And over the years, I've had many people come to me and ask about especially baffling dreams. Dreams they felt they really wanted to understand, or they thought were important, but they found confusing in one way or another. Or in some cases found frightening, the nightmares that we have sometimes. And they just kind of wanted help with dealing with it. So I've heard a lot of dreams from people. Again, I've come up with a short version over time of what I like to call Auntie Melody's Quick Guide to Dreams or Dreaming. Note that on this show, we're going to go far beyond this list, But this is the quick list, and I just want to go ahead and read it the way I usually outline it, because it's a good place to start. First off, number one, most dreams are simply our brains rehashing what happened during the day and processing the information that comes in. Sometimes this is on a really basic physical level and doesn't mean much at all. If you keep a journal over a period of weeks, though, you may see patterns that provide information on what your inner self is concerned about. But each individual dream on its own may be pretty much a non-event, except in that we need them to stay healthy, and this sort of ability to process patterns over time, and we'll talk about that more later. 2, some dreams have serious messages from our inner self, or our mind. They usually present in symbols, which makes them very personal, and also very hard for other people to read. But we can all try to understand them. It isn't uncommon for a person, say, developing a medical condition, to dream they are being strangled, as someone with an early throat cancer did, and then, a friend advised him to go to the doctor, and it was caught in time. Or to dream of less dire things, like a reminder to drink more water, dream that you're standing at a drinking fountain, and you just keep drinking and drinking and drinking. And that may be a message that you're dehydrated, and your body is like trying to process in the night, and when you wake up, you get a glass of water. Most common of these message dreams for us older folks is that dreaming of trying to find that bathroom, which is really funny, but if you're younger, you're laughing now, but trust me, just wait. However, these sorts of messages may also be really serious answers to problems. The scientists get these kind of dreams a lot, or even a sudden understanding of a life situation, something you've been thinking about, worrying about, doing research on, or whatever, and then suddenly in your dream, either directly or indirectly, the answer's there. And finally, the third type of dream, it really has several subcategories, but they're all part of what I call the sort of serious, real, true, intense dream. I know that this dream was something different type of dream. And they can involve anything from symbols that you just know must mean something important, but you're not sure what. A classic example of this is Pharaoh's dream in the Old Testament, where he tells Joseph about seeing the cows, and it's obviously very important, but it makes no sense to him. And it can go anywhere from something very obscure like that to a direct moment-to-moment vision of a future event that later happens exactly as you viewed it in the dream. There's a lot of things in between these two states. And there are other versions, like having a crossed over relative, someone who you love that's passed, come and tell you an important message, and they may be so real you can even smell them. Or having a voice saying something, as a person I was listening to recently said, they had a dream of a cow and it said no beef. Well, we don't know for sure, but that may be a suggestion that, at least for their family, they should buy some beef pretty soon. Or perhaps the person should not be eating beef. But in any case, it is a message, a very brief one, and that's where interpretation comes from. Now, sometimes these sorts of precognitive dreams are actually warnings, like no beef might be to eat no beef. And they may change the final outcome of a longer, sort of more epic dream, because the person changes their behavior and makes a different choice. There's other things that you can dream about that sometimes don't seem to budge. This is particularly true of a dream that turns out to be accurate about, say, an earth change or something like that. But being human beings, what I call the true or real visionary dreams, may only be partly understood because everything has to pass through our human brains, waking or sleeping. And our mind may change something symbolic in sleep to something it understands better, or can accept better than the raw message itself. For example, again, in the cancer dream, the brain changed the message the person was probably trying to tell themselves, or a higher power may have been telling them, or an ancestor, that you have cancer, to a dream of being strangled, because that was what they could accept or perceive. Other people might have dreamed the doctor giving them the message, or perhaps having a test. But it's rare to have something that's clear unless you suspect something already, especially in terms of a health thing. And whenever you get that kind of dream, it is just a good idea to go to the doctor and get it checked. So that's the quick version of dreams. The one I tend to give out in various internet forums or on Facebook when the subject comes up. However, I'd like to go into a bit more detail about the first two types and a lot more depth into the number 3 dream, because those are really the sort of unseen world dreams that are most relevant to this show. Now, that first sort of rehashing dream may seem mundane, but it's actually, as I said earlier, very important, because it allows our brain to refresh itself. Again, to go over the information collected during the day, do gentle mental repair work, and probably some physical work on ourselves as well. It's obvious, at least, that most mammals seem to share these dreams, and possibly other animals too, but you see it in mammals. If you've ever seen like a tiny kitten obviously dreaming of nursing from its mother, or watched your dog's leg, you know they're chasing rabbits in their sleep. You can just see it because they're moving their legs and they're twitching while they're laid out by the fire. You can just tell that their minds have the capacity to capture images from the day, and then they experience them while sleeping and they process them. Hence, I like to think of this as probably the oldest form of dreaming, as sort of part of our animal brain, and that's when it's most closely tied to our physical health and well-being. The other cool thing about this sort of dream is that, again, as I said earlier, it may be nothing all that obvious. If you keep your dream journal, and we've talked about those in previous shows, where you write down whatever dreams you can remember when first waking up, you may very well be able to see certain patterns coming up that tell you a message from your inner self or from a higher power, or again, an ancestor, an angel, whoever is trying to tell you something, even if each dream on its own is pretty nonsensical. These are particularly true, I think, of sort of inner unconscious, trying to tell your conscious mind things, but it can be something even more important than that. The images in these dreams tend to be familiar and strange mixes of things done in the daylight or at other times. Before, with stuff in the book, you may like read this, have an image from a book you read before bed, something you experienced at age 3, and it just makes no sense. I had one once where I was eating an ice cream cone on a bus because I had in the day eaten an ice cream cone and been late for the bus, that kind of thing. But then if you write these things down and then look them over several weeks, the patterns start to show up. Now, again, a favorite example is from my own life. Years ago, I was keeping a dream journal for a class for several months, actually. And I kept having dreams of looking for something I couldn't find. It was always something different. Sometimes it was missing a school locker. Remember that in high school? You just can't find your locker. Other times it was my purse. It was gone. I couldn't find it anywhere. Another time was my bus pass. It was always something that was lost, and I was always looking for it. Then I literally met my husband across a crowded room, and boom, the dream stopped. So each dream on its own was very mundane, pretty much nonsensical, and even really tiresome. I mean, sometimes I woke up feeling really drained and cranky because I didn't find that thing. Taken together, they were a little understood at the time window, not only into my own inner world, but perhaps the unseen world as well. In other words, my life partner was coming. I just hadn't quite found him yet. And we were getting there, but the universe hadn't quite brought us together yet. A second sort of dream is similar to the patterns of the more common dreams, except that it tends to have a more important message or an understanding that comes across to us in a single dream or occasionally a series of dreams. There's also the phenomenon sometimes of the repeating dream, which does the same thing. It just happens over and over again the same way until we figure out the message, or it becomes really obvious what it meant all along. A pretty good example of the message dream was, again, that sort of the cancer patient described before. He dreamed he was being strangled, and somehow the dream seemed really important. The next day, he asked his doctor friend what it might mean, anything, particularly if it had anything to do with an illness. And as I said before, when he got his medical checkup, he found his cancer, and it was caught in time. Now, a related sort of message dream would be the many reports of scientists and engineers who spend all day trying to figure out a solution to a problem. I heard this a lot with mathematicians. and then they dream the answer either in a direct or symbolic way after going to sleep at night. It's suddenly there. Relaxed and able to work, unfettered, the inner parts of the mind sort out all the information that's been jumbled together and pushed against the wall and thrown in all kinds of ways. And it just plots out the answer to the situation in a way that the person can remember it or understands it when they get up. And sometimes that's done symbolically, and sometimes it's done very, the person will just like see a blackboard and they're like writing out the equation or whatever it is that they're seeing. They take the tool and they insert it and it works. Another variation of this dream seems to involve the inner mind practicing a new skill, either a mental skill or a physical one. A potter friend of mine recalled having dreams for weeks when she was first learning to throw pots on the wheel. She had dreams of like giant pots going up and down and up and down and up and down, looking from above, her fingers shaping the clay and feeling like she was going to fall right in and get sucked in. I had a similar one myself when my feet tracing loom patterns endlessly when I was doing a floor loom weaving, first learning it. So again, it's that practice. It's on a mental level in the dream, but it's almost like your body is practicing the emotions, even though you aren't actually moving it. It's your mind-body connection that's working there. And once in a great while, the brain is a wonderful thing. You can remember things that maybe you can't do anymore, because I will still have wild dreams of learning to stand still and balance on the back of a running horse. My body can no longer do that kind of thing. But in the magic of dreams, my mind remembers just exactly how my body learned to do them and can do them once again. This is another thing I think our ancestors understood, and again made the world of magic and dreams so interconnected in such a marvelous way. Okay, now most human dreams seem to be either type 1 or type 2. Those really are the most common. Occasionally they're kind of an odd mixture of both. This isn't like a finite thing here. On the signature of it, most dreams are tend to be a bit choppy, broken, and nonsensical. That's the signature of a lot of dreams. They jump through topics and time zones. 1 minute you're 3 years old and playing with your blocks, and the next minute you're rushing through traffic and late for work, followed by eating a hot dog upside down in a barn you used to play when you were a kid. It's just, it's just very jumpy. Bits and pieces of the dreams may seem to make some sense on their own. They may form a pattern or answer a question, but in general their signature is to be, just simply kind of unfocused and at times kind of weird. You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. The final type of dream can have a lot of names, but they're often thought of as paranormal dreams, or as I like to call them, dreams that relate directly to the unseen world in some way. When I'm just chatting to people in general, I tend to leave the explanation at that point rather than confuse people. Because, most people don't want to know much more than, okay, yes, psychic dreams and prophetic dreams and these kind of things, we know they may exist, or if you're a skeptic, you may be skeptical about that. But we all know there are folk stories and tales about, that sort of dream. People recognize historically that these dreams exist. But for a show on the unseen world, I think this is exactly the kind of thing we want to look into. We don't want to just brush it over the way I will when just sort of chatting in general to the general public. First I have to mention again that dreams are fluid and personal. So there will again be some overflow from one sort of dream to another. I've had a lot of experiences when dreaming that goes from the usual sort of trippy stuff, just unfocused and all over the place, where suddenly it seems that things have changed. I am now in what I personally tend to think of as a real or a true dream state. Now, calling it real or true dream does not mean that every single thing that happens in the dream is actually going to happen in real or true life, or even that it's a prophecy. It just means that it's a real and true message of some sort. Usually of a much more powerfully significant type than the sort that shows up in the more usual types of message dreams. A lot of my clients will say something like, I know what my dreams are like, and I can't tell you why, but I just know this dream was different. That's the hallmark of this sort of true dreaming. You just know. Sometimes you may also wake up covered in sweat with your heart racing. Other times in a state of profound and ecstatic joy, or really deep sadness, but almost always a mark of these dreams is you're very deeply affected in some way. You think about it for about 24 hours. Some people even feel sort of a sense of dislocation for a few hours or even a couple of days until they sort of phase back into the real world. This is really different from the way you feel usually getting up in the morning. Well, these dreams are much rarer than the usual sort of dreaming. They do tend to have some common patterns and themes. One of the most common of these dreams is the visit from the beloved dead or the ancestor. A reader comes simply to tell us that they're okay, often within a year of their passing, or more rarely to give us a warning or a piece of advice. Now, I experienced a common form of the first sort when I had a dream that suddenly shifted from the sort of trippy stuff. I found myself in a very real-looking ballroom that was empty. But there was, except for a piano player in the corner. And then an old boyfriend, looking much younger than I remembered him. I thought at first actually it was his younger brother, who he didn't have, but I just wondered, was there another younger brother, because this man looked so much younger. But he came wafting into the room, and then he took me into his arms to waltz with him. Then I could smell him, and I knew from the smell that it was him, and not a younger brother or anyone else. In the dream, the piano player plays. My ex-boyfriend waltzes me across the floor, kisses me on the forehead, sort of bows a little bit, and then it goes away almost like in a puff of smoke, and I wake up in stunned and shaking and the whole thing. Now, you have to understand that the last time I had seen this man in real life, we'd not been a couple for years, but I was visiting his home, some of his relatives also in California, and it was New Year's Eve, and he asked me to dance the midnight waltz with him, as we had always done when we were a couple. After dancing that last New Year's waltz, he died just a few months later, so this was a mixture of the personal in the message, and, the dream's a classic in the sort reported by many people, because the smells even often connect us to loved ones and show up in these dreams repeatedly. Sometimes it's like your mother's favorite perfume, or granddad's pipe, or a favorite flower. But for some reason, when you read the literature on this topic of dreams of visitors, of people who've died recently, you get these things with smells a lot. And again, this dream occurred about a year after his death, and that seems to be the time period. Anywhere from 1 day to 1 year seem to be fairly common. And I have heard, now this is just a little aside here, but I've heard from people that do a lot of work in this field that they feel that this is one of the safer ways to contact the dead. When I have a really grieving client who is really in a vulnerable position, I don't do mediumship professionally. And often, rather than send the person to a medium unless I know someone I can really trust, instead, and even if I do that, even if I give them a referral, I'll also suggest that perhaps, I can't guarantee anything, but perhaps when they go to sleep at night, they might make the suggestion that if the person wants to talk to them, in the dream state, they would be very open to having a visitation. And many people feel this is a very safe way to do it. I think you can't force it. Many times it's spontaneous, but it is a very beautiful and valuable thing when it occurs, and it's a very safe way to interact with someone who has passed on. Now, this sort of dream is related, but not quite the same thing as people seeing actual visions or perhaps sometimes waking dreams of their loved ones at the foot of the bed who may have died in real time, pretty much the same moment or within a few hours of when they passed away, but the person in the bed's not aware of it. These sort of visions tend to happen when someone dies on a battlefield or unexpectedly in a car wreck or something. And it just seems to be their way of passing by to sort of try to tell their loved one that they're okay, they're on their way to the underworld, and it's all right. Sometimes the person can hear them, sometimes they speak, sometimes they don't, but it's a little different from, because the first sort of dream I talked about seems to be more someone coming back, whereas this seems to be people more sort of waving goodbye. The other sort of visit from the ancestor dream is a little different and crosses into the world of precognitive dreams, which we'll talk about in a moment. But these are dreams where either a departed person you know or someone from the past comes to give you advice, a message directly, or a warning. Sometimes they state the message in words, or they may indicate it in other ways that hopefully you'll understand. In literature, we have the extended warnings and visits in A Christmas Carol, where Scrooge gets all three typical versions of this quote-unquote dream visit. It's fiction, but it was based on a lot of folklore and things that people understood at the time, and whether you believe that, ghosts really come and talk to people or not, everybody in the 19th century when he was writing this understood that people had these sorts of experiences. Now, in my own life, my father told me how when he married his first wife, his late grandmother appeared at the end of his bed on his wedding night, and she was crying. She didn't talk. She was just crying. And that marriage sadly lasted less than a year, and they divorced. A few years later, he met and married my mother, and once again, on his wedding night, his grandmother appeared, and this time she was smiling. As is frequent with these sorts of visitations, my dad was not really certain if he was awake or dreaming. And I'm not sure it matters all that much, because either way we seem to be in enough of a dreamlike or trance-like state to perceive our visitors, and they seem to find it easier to come and to use able to come to present themselves, and our minds and bodies can perceive us better when we're relaxed. So, it's technically kind of maybe this in-between state, because most people remember sort of being awake, but again, I don't think it really matters. So I would class it in the dream category, but it's a little different. Now, the next type of sort of paranormal dream I often hear about from friends, and I get this from clients too a lot, is the precognitive dream, or a dream that either seems to be or actually is about a possible future event of some sort. These can be very simple or seemingly silly, or they can be really profound. I mean, it may be somebody saying, you dream exactly what they're going to say tomorrow night over roast at dinner, and that's exactly what they say. They say please pass me the ketchup, and then in real life they say, please pass me the ketchup. But this isn't a person that normally eats ketchup. It's not something your mind would just predict. It would be a little unusual. So, and you suddenly remember that you dreamed it the night before. So it can be really kind of silly things like that we don't really know why we're doing this, to really powerful vision-like epics that seemingly go on for hours in full Technicolor with special effects, that make Hollywood look tame. I've had these, they just seem to go on. You've really maybe only dreamed 5 minutes if there was a machine on you, but it seemed like 4 hours. Most often, they are somewhat in between, and I think the most intense ones for the average person are the really personal ones. Again, these tend to be warning dreams, but can be about happy events as well. I mean, I think the most common one you see in press reports is whenever there's a tragic plane crash or something like that, you always see in the paper, almost always, the press will get a hold of one or two people who were supposed to be on the plane, and maybe they had a dream or they just felt they shouldn't go, and so they just changed their plans. And sometimes this may be coincidence, because this happens. But other times, they'll actually have, well, I actually dreamed the night before that the plane was going to crash, so since I could change my ticket, I just did, and so those things really do happen. And again, it becomes part of the literature. And when this happens to people, it becomes very direct and personal, and it becomes harder to shake off. And I've had clients come to me that have had experiences like this, and they want to understand them a little bit better. They've already happened, and I can assure them that this is like a normal part of the human experience, and that they heard a warning and they took it, and then they changed the future because they made a choice. And as usually in the dreams, the dreamer does have a choice, because if they dream of any of these terrible things, if they make that waking choice in life, they can simply avoid that situation. The accident still may happen, the plane may still crash, but the person isn't on it. Now, other times, there's simply nothing they can do about it. You dream about something that seems to be either good, bad, or indifferent, often kind of a warning, but it's not really anything you can do anything about. It happens anyway. But I think this is our mind sort of preparing us for this situation to happen. Or if not our mind, save the universe. We're sort of rehearsing it. And again, kind of forewarned is forearmed. So we're not totally taken aback when it occurs. Now again, not all precognitive dreams are about bad events. I mean, I've had plenty of people, dream about their spouse years before they meet them, or you see themselves working at a new job that they dream about. I've done that once or twice. Years or houses that they have never seen and later own. Those are happy dreams. But being human, the most dreams that people remember that are precognitive seem to be the ones that seem to be a warning of some sort. I'm not sure if we simply remember them more frequently, or if they actually are more common than the positive type, but that's just kind of how human brains tend to work. Now, precognitive dreams may be very straightforward, like dreaming of a specific event, either personal or global. Something like an earthquake at a certain place. I get those a lot from people. But precognitive dreams, or any real sort of true type dream, can also be symbolic. As I mentioned in the quick guide to dreams, the Old Testament story of Pharaoh and the dream about all these cows, the fat cows and the thin cows, is just really a classic one. As is Joseph so tangling it to mean there will be 7 fat years and 7 lean years. Now, a king in those days was a very important person, and he was responsible for feeding and caring for his people, in theory anyway. So it makes perfect sense that he would dream of coming plenty followed by famine in order to be able to prepare for it, especially if the gods were happy with him. They might send him this message. The problem is that the dream is coming through his brain, and it comes out in these symbols that he doesn't really understand. So the inspired or perhaps trained dream reader is called in, and that's Joseph. And it comes true, and Joseph gets taken out of prison, and he gets a really high position at court, and becomes part of what I call, in another show, the Merlin effect. Now, you can listen to this entire show back in the archives, but the Merlin effect is something I pretty much define as people who become the magical, scholarly, and, basically Merlin advisors to any king, warlord, or other important person. A lot of important people tend to have, basically their court astrologer or their pet prognosticator, and Joseph essentially takes over this role. Now, we had to be a little careful with the world of current events or great epic types of dreams for several reasons. One of the most important is because these days pretty much everyone watches the news, sees movies and TV, reads books, and otherwise has a lot of influences that can affect that store of images in our brain that we have to play with during sleep. So not all dreams of an alien invasion, even if it's really powerful and seems really true, really mean that the Martians are landing tomorrow. Sometimes we can have really wonderfully long, powerful, colorful dreams that seem to be our minds having fun. So after waking up from something like that, my first question is going to be, okay, did I watch War of the Worlds before going to bed last night? If the answer is yes, I may still write the dream down because it may have some symbolic value, but I make a note of the movie. If the answer is no, then I may take it a little more seriously. But again, if the content is just way out there, like an alien invasion, then I start looking for symbols. For example, what could an alien be besides little green men or, big marching tripods? Well, there are a number of choices. I could be my brain could be, dreaming about foreign people, invaders, diseases. There are a lot of things that can be alien, or even possibly something else coming from outer space, and so basically, again, we have to be careful here. Things are not always what they seem on the surface in waking life, and dreams just can be even more complicated. Another problem with this 24/7 technology images coming into our brains all the time is that we can even have really profound, actual recommendative dreams about the images themselves. The most famous is a man who in the 1950s had a really intense dream, very powerful vision of a planet being blown apart and destroyed by a massive spaceship. He just knew this was real. He just could feel it was a real dream. And for years he believed he'd been given a vision of the end of the Earth. Then in the 1970s, he saw his first Star Wars movie and started laughing. Yep, he'd seen it all before. In fact, he'd seen it exactly and perfectly in his dream back in the 1950s. The planet blown apart was in a movie. He had dreamed himself watching the movie. When, and particularly in the 1950s, they didn't have those kind of special effects, so it did not even occur to him that something like that could be shown on a screen. There are a lot of theories on how this sort of dream could work. I think the most common one is that time may be fluid, and the dreamer in the 1950s, again, somehow just sees through the eyes of himself in the 1970s. There's similar ideas about some of Nostradamus' visions being a similar thing, but with him seeing through the eyes of people in his future. Not his own future, but in their future. I mean, his future and their present, basically. So, if Nostradamus were to have seen a vision of me looking at my computer, he could be seeing through my eyes now. I just invented that, but it's that kind of thing. I think the jury's still out on these ideas, but I think they make as much sense to me as any other, and I tend to think it's highly likely. Other times, the fact that the dream occurs may give the dreamer enough information to make a choice that will not totally stop the events, but may lead to a different ending, as I reported earlier. My hunch is this is exactly why we have these sorts of dreams, is so either we can change them or prepare for them. And sometimes it's to get a message to other people, too. It isn't always for us. I should add that in. Other types of really epic dreams seem to be possible or probable futures, but not always actual futures. There is a good reason why, if you have a dream that seems to be a possible future event, it's a good idea to write it down, date it, and if you want to keep a serious record, put it in a registered letter to yourself, and then mail it back to yourself, obviously registered, and then place it somewhere, like a safe deposit box, a safe in your own house, something like that. But if you're just keeping a personal journal, at least mark it down and date it. You might not be able to prove it to anybody else, but you've got it in your records. That you know what you've said, or you've dreamed, actually. Now, the fact is that not every dream about an earthquake actually happens, but some do. And not every dream about a plane crash happens, but some do. And because sometimes it's very hard to tell a seriously powerful personal message dream from a precognitive one, it's very important to self-reflect again, even on the dreams that seem so real that you are sure they're visions of current events. You need to ask yourself about your personal symbols. You ask, what does alien mean to me? Because dreams often are on more than one level. This is where it gets a little deep and complicated, but just bear with me. I think you can follow me here. Yeah, because I realize this is confusing. But you can have a dream, say, about a car wreck, that may really be about your life. But it may be you're heading in the wrong direction. You're dreaming about this car wreck because on the surface your unconscious is trying to tell you you are making a wrong decision, and if you keep going in this way, you're gonna sort of have a train wreck or a car wreck in your life. But the same dream could also be a warning of a potential actual auto accident if you're not careful as well. And if you are really gifted or just really having a psychic moment, you could have the same dream might even happen near a time when the auto industry itself is about to have one of its periodic collapses or a car wreck in some fashion. On all these levels, these things are happening. But the most important to you are the first two messages. First, the one that suggests you may be making some bad choices, and the one that guides you to driving more slowly and carefully while you do so. So, those are the two that you really want to pay attention to, because then if you can tell that you're going in the wrong way, you could turn around, change your focus in life or whatever the problem is. You change the decision before it's too late, and then also watch your driving. The automaker's problems are really only relevant to you if you work in the industry, and even then, it's less urgent than the first two problems. Now, if you listen to your messages, you should be able to turn your car around again and avoid being near the accident and totally change the future so it goes into the dustbin of probable futures that never happen. That's the outcome you want in situations like that. And when it comes to negative stuff, that's always, again, the best result. There are lots of arguments in the occult and metaphysical world about the nature of time and is the future fated to happen or not. My feeling on that, like a lot of things, is ultimately it's above my pay grade. But you'll hear me say that a lot. But this one really is above my pay grade. It's right up there with, are there multiple universes? I don't know. But it seems to me that the future is more fluid and based on the choices we make now. And dreams are a very important mirror to helping us make those choices and to see what is really happening beyond, in the unseen world around us. There are other frequent sorts of powerful dreams of the past, that seem to indicate either astral time travel, which I think does happen sometimes, past life experiences, or both. The time travel dreams, I think, are a lot rarer, but they're reported by people saying that they felt like they were there, but no one could see me. They often are seen to be themselves. They're viewing some important historical event. They're walking around a crowd. They can hear voices, but no one can hear them talk. It's like almost like being a shadow or, a spirit yourself. And I think sometimes people just are really going back in time and they're really seeing things. And it's very interesting. We can't prove it, of course. There are related dreams where this goes sideways, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But it's a very interesting sort of thing. The past life type of dream, I think, is a lot more common. It tends to be, rather than standing, sort of being invisible, you're usually in some sort of period dress. The dreamer describes himself as a part of the action rather than watching it. They often recognize people they know in this life, but in a different role. A spouse in this life might be their child in the dream, and that when they're living in the 18th century. Sometimes these dreams may show actions or situations that may explain something in this life, and other times they just see random memories that have bled through from that time into this one. Mind is a funny thing. Flying dreams and actual astral travel dreams can occur. In fact, a number of traditional cultures believe that when you go to sleep, the mind always leaves the body, goes to the unseen world. I think that's likely true in one way, but actual sort of what, again, metaphysical people call astral travel of the spirit leaving the body to journey somewhere else seems to be an entire topic all on its own. For the sake of this program, let's just say that these would be dreams where you seem to leave your body, often floating to the ceiling while viewing your body below. Sometimes that's it. Other times you may find yourself flying off to some destination. A frequent one is like your girlfriend's or boyfriend's house, and you stand at the end of their bed. And at some point, while you're just looking at them, you feel a sudden pull, and you may feel like you're suddenly falling back into your body, and you almost hear a crash and wake up, usually a bit startled, dazed, and confused. The next morning, your significant other may call and say, "I had the weirdest dream you were standing by my bed last night." That last part only happens once in a great while, but it's been known to occur often enough to pop up in the literature. And if this bears any resemblance at all to reports you may have read or heard about, out-of-body experiences when people are under sedation or their heart stops, it is very similar, except we don't have the light at the end of the tunnel, but people often talk about seeing silver cords and, being attached to their body and then that fall back in at the end. It's very interesting and it's all very similar. Now, there are entire books, lots of them out there, for people who want to study or learn how to do astral travel, which can be done in both sleeping and trance states. It isn't a topic I've done a lot of work on myself. I've done some, but I'm going to leave my listeners do their own research on this one. And in future, I may, if I can, get a guest on it, because it's a really fascinating topic, and I think it relates a lot to the sort of after-death experiences that have also been reported when people obviously live through. But I think it's a topic for another whole show. So finally, dreams are above all else a massive collection of symbols that our inner minds use to process information. That information may have come from the textbook we were reading before bedtime, or it may come directly from a powerful ancestor visiting us from the hidden realms. Either way, the information, again, has to come through our brains. I know I keep repeating that, but it's very important because the inner mind has its own way of sorting and presenting that information to us. There are literally thousands of books out there on the symbols and interpretation of dreams, probably going back to the most ancient times and the first books. And I'm sure it went back for thousands and thousands of years as oral traditions before that. But what's the most important definition of what any given dream or dream symbol may mean is, what does it mean to me or to you, yourself? After you establish what it means to you, yourself, then you can look outward for other possible messages it may be flagging. Once in a great while, you're likely to get a dream that is not so personal, and these you can choose to share or not as you feel prompted to, but those tend to be those great epic prophetic dreams that, they may be personal on a level as well, but you can just tell that the message is not totally for you. But again, dreams are a really amazing and safe gateway to the unseen world. I think one of the best for people starting out. Again, when you go to sleep at night, you can, have that dream journal, just a pencil and a notebook by your bed, and before you go to sleep, you could just suggest to yourself, first, do your protection stuff, and I have that free online. We've also done shows about it. Envision a white light around yourself, and that you are safe, and that you only wish to experience things that are positive. And then just very quickly think, as you're falling to sleep, I'm really open if there's any messages or interesting things that my unconscious mind, the universe, my ancestors would like to tell me. I'd like to, see them in my dreams. Please let me know, and please help me remember my dreams. And even if you just say, I want to remember my dreams, if you just want to sort of narrow it down to that, you'll be surprised. You start remembering them. And what you do is then, the minute you wake up, you grab that pencil and paper and you write them down, even if all you can do is write down keywords. Often I can only write down keywords, then I come back and fill them in after I've, done a couple of things I may have to do when I get up. But, write down those keywords, and if you keep that dream journal, over time you are going to see patterns. And then also, if you have one of these more powerful or epic dreams, you'll have it recorded, and you'll at least have some notation of it, so you don't forget it later. This is why I think most people forget a lot of their dreams, because we just aren't trained to remember them. Well, I could probably do about 5 more shows on this topic, but I think this is enough for a first one for now. We can come back to it another point. But at this point, I'm going to tell you all to have a very good night. I want you to sleep very well. I want you to grab your pens and papers. I want you to give yourself that suggestions, and I want you to have a wonderful night's sleep. Until then, and until next time, though, I'm going to say good night. For now, from Cat's Eye in the Future. See you again soon. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.